For centuries, wars were won by the side with more soldiers, more guns, and more tanks. The side that could put more boots on the ground usually came out on top. That was the simple rule of war. But something is happening right now in Ukraine that is breaking this old rule completely. A new kind of weapon has entered the battlefield, and it is not a bigger missile or a stronger tank. It is a small machine, a flying machine, a thinking machine, and it is changing everything we know about modern warfare. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, most military experts around the world gave Ukraine very little chance of survival. Russia had one of the largest armies on the planet. It had tanks, missiles, aircraft, and what seemed like an endless supply of soldiers. Ukraine, by comparison, was smaller, less equipped, and far less prepared. The world watched and waited, expecting a quick Russian victory, but that victory never came. And now, more than 3 years later, it is Russia that is struggling, bleeding, and losing thousands of soldiers every single month. The question is, what changed? How did a smaller country hold off one of the most powerful militaries in the world? The answer, more than anything else, is drones. Russia's strategy from the very beginning was based on one thing: numbers. Send more soldiers than the enemy can handle. Push forward in wave after wave. Exhaust the defenders. Break the line. This strategy had worked in the past. The Soviet Union used it. In World War II, Russia used versions of it in Chechnya and other conflicts. The idea was simple. Keep sending people until the other side runs out of bullets, energy, and will to fight. Russia believed it had enough soldiers to make this work. And for a while, that belief kept them going. But Ukraine had something Russia did not expect. Ukraine had engineers, programmers, and creative thinkers who were not bound by old military thinking. They were fighting for their homes, their families, and their country. And they were willing to try anything. So they started building drones. Not the big, expensive military drones that cost millions of dollars. Small drones, cheap drones, smart drones. And they started sending them to the front lines in huge numbers. The results were stunning. According to data released by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, around 96% of confirmed Russian casualties in recent months were caused not by Ukrainian soldiers, not by artillery, not by tanks, but by unmanned aerial vehicles. That number is almost impossible to believe. Think about what it means. For every 100 Russian soldiers killed or wounded on the battlefield, 96 of them were taken out by a drone. Only 4 were hit by traditional weapons like guns, tanks, or bombs dropped from aircraft. This is a ratio that has never been seen before in any war in recorded history. It marks a turning point, not just in this conflict, but in the entire way humanity fights wars. Let us look at some of these drones more closely, because understanding what they can do helps you understand why Russia is in so much trouble right now. One of the most talked about systems is the Mars drone. This is Ukraine's new generation AI-powered attack drone, and it represents a massive leap forward in what a small flying machine can do. The Mars drone flies at very high speeds. It has a range of up to 60 kilometers, which means it can fly far beyond the front line and hit targets deep inside Russian-held territory. Supply depots, fuel storage, ammunition dumps, command posts, all of these things that Russia needs to keep. Its army alive and fighting are now within reach of this drone. But the most remarkable thing about the Mars drone is not its speed or its range. It is something far more important. This drone does not need a signal from a human operator to fly and find its target. In most drones used earlier in this war, there's a constant connection between the drone and the person controlling it. The operator sits somewhere safe, watches a video feed from the drone's camera, and guides it toward the target. This works well until the enemy jams the signal. Russia invested heavily in electronic warfare systems designed to do exactly this: jam the signal, lose the drone. Russia had trucks, vehicles, and large installations filled with powerful jamming equipment. And for a time, this worked. Ukrainian drones would lose contact with their operators and fall harmlessly to the ground. Russia felt confident that it had an answer to the drone problem. Then Ukraine changed the game completely. The Mars drone does not rely on a continuous signal from an operator. Instead, it carries on board artificial intelligence. Before the mission, the drone is loaded with maps of the terrain, images of potential targets, and recognition software that can identify enemy vehicles, equipment, and positions. Once IT is launched, it flies on its own. It thinks on its own. It selects the target on its own, and it strikes on its own. There is no signal to jam because after launch, the drone is not talking to anyone. It is making its own decisions based on the data it was given before takeoff. Russia's billions of dollars worth of jamming equipment became useless against this one simple change. You cannot jam something that is not sending or receiving a signal. This is the collapse not just of one Russian strategy, but of an entire doctrine. Russia had spent enormous amounts of money and years of development creating electronic warfare systems, systems like the Krasukho 4, designed specifically to blind and disable enemy electronics and drones. All of that investment, all of that hardware, became irrelevant overnight. Ukraine did not need a bigger army to defeat this threat. It needed smarter software. Another drone that is proving extremely effective is the Ram-2X. This is what military experts call a loitering munition. The idea behind it is both simple and terrifying. The drone is launched and flies to a target area. Then, instead of immediately diving toward something to hit, it circles, it waits, it watches. The electric motor that powers it makes almost no noise, so Russian soldiers on the ground cannot hear it coming. The drone might circle above an area for up to an hour, looking for the right moment and the right target. When the operator decides to strike, the drone begins its final dive. And here's the clever part. Even in those final seconds, if Russian jamming equipment cuts the signal between the operator and the drone's own AI takes over and guides it to the target anyway. The signal jam that was supposed to save Russian soldiers instead saves no one. The Ram-2X carries a warhead of about 3 kilograms. That does not sound like much until you realize it can be loaded with different types of explosives depending on the mission. It can carry a high explosive warhead for destroying vehicles and equipment. It can carry a thermobaric warhead, which creates a massive pressure wave capable of collapsing structures and devastating personnel inside bunkers or buildings. Or it can carry an anti-armor warhead designed to pierce the top armor of tanks and armored vehicles, which is typically much thinner than the front armor. And all of this capability costs only a few $1,000s per unit. Now consider what this drone is hunting. One of Russia's most important air defense tools on the front line is the Tor-M2 missile system. A single Tor-M2 system costs more than $25 million. It takes months of training to get a crew ready to operate it effectively. The radar components are complex and expensive. The missiles it fires to shoot down incoming threats cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each. Under the current sanctions regime, Russia is finding it increasingly difficult to manufacture new ones. Getting spare parts is a growing nightmare. Replacing a destroyed Tor-M2 takes months of production time and is getting harder every day. And yet, a Ram-2X drone costing a few $1,000s can destroy one of these systems in a single strike. The math is brutal. Russia loses $25 million, Ukraine loses a few thousand, and this equation is repeating itself every single day across hundreds of kilometers of front line. It is not just TOR systems that Ukraine is hunting. Ukrainian drone units have been targeting all kinds of expensive Russian military equipment. Pantsir air defense systems, Buk missile complexes, fuel trucks, ammunition depots, command vehicles. A Ukrainian unit known as Maguia's Birds destroyed an entire Buk complex in the Luhansk region in a single night. The same night, they also drained fuel reserves and paralyzed logistics operations in the area. These are not random attacks. They are carefully planned operations designed to break Russia's ability to move, supply, and sustain its forces. And they are working. The impact on Russian logistics has been severe. Supply lines that were once relatively safe are now under constant threat. Fuel depots located 60 kilometers behind the front line, which would have seemed completely out of danger in earlier wars, are now within easy reach of Ukraine's drones. Ammunition convoys that set out to resupply frontline units are being spotted and struck before they even reach their destination. Russian commanders have been forced to constantly change their supply routes, trying to find paths that are not being watched. But Ukraine's drone operators, using satellite data and AI-powered analysis, can calculate new routes and reposition their assets within hours. Every time Russia changes its logistics plan, it costs time, fuel, and coordination. The chaos is accumulating. And a military that cannot reliably feed its frontline units with ammunition and supplies is a military that will eventually fail. But Ukraine's drone campaign is not limited to the battlefield zone. Ukraine has developed a long-range attack drone called the FP-1, and it has changed what is possible for a country fighting a defensive war. The FP-1 is a fixed-wing drone, meaning it has wings like a small airplane, rather than spinning rotors like a typical consumer drone. It flies in one direction on a one-way mission. It has a range of more than 1,000 kilometers, which means it can reach deep into Russian territory, far from the front lines. It is built from wood and composite plastic materials, which give it a very small radar signature. Russian radar systems have a hard time detecting it, and because it is designed for mass production, Ukraine can build large numbers of them relatively quickly and cheaply. What does Ukraine target with these long-range drones? Not soldiers, not tanks. The FP-1 goes after Russia's industrial heart, oil refineries, steel and metallurgy plants, energy infrastructure, power generation facilities. These are the targets that keep Russia's war machine running. When an oil refinery burns, the supply of fuel to the front line is disrupted. When a power plant is damaged, the factories making missiles and artillery shells slow down or stop. When a steel plant is hit, the supply of metal for building military vehicles becomes tighter. It is a strategy of slowly strangling the industrial capacity that Russia depends on to continue fighting. A missile that cannot be manufactured cannot be fired. A tank that cannot be built cannot be sent to the front. The FP-1 is not just a weapon, it is a tool of economic warfare waged from the sky. Russia has expensive air defense systems designed to intercept incoming threats. The S-400 is one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world. But Ukraine has learned how to exploit its limitations. When Ukraine launches swarms of drones, some of them will be shot down. But shooting them down costs Russia missiles. Each S-400 interceptor missile costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. When Russia fires these expensive missiles to shoot down cheap drones, the exchange rate works heavily in Ukraine's favor. And some drones always get through. Every drone that reaches its target destroys infrastructure that takes years and enormous amounts of money to rebuild. Ukraine's revolution is also happening at sea. Sweden committed RBS-15 anti-ship missiles to Ukraine, and these have now been confirmed as active in Ukraine's naval arsenal. These missiles are specifically designed to be resistant to electronic jamming. They fly just meters above the surface of the water, which makes them extremely difficult to detect on radar until it is too late. They were built by Sweden as a direct answer to Russian electronic warfare capabilities, and they prove their worth dramatically when Ukrainian naval forces used them to strike the Kivash oil platform located approximately 60 to 80 kilometers off the coast of Crimea. Russia had been using this abandoned drilling platform as a base for radar monitoring, electronic warfare operations, and air defense. A single Ukrainian salvo ended all of that. The platform was destroyed, and the attack was coordinated with kamikaze robot boats and FPV drones operating from mobile coastal launchers, creating what amounts to a no-go zone for Russian naval vessels in large parts of the Black Sea. Russia, which once dominated the Black Sea with its naval fleet, has been pushed back. Now, on top of all this, there is something new beginning to appear on the battlefield that is still in early stages, but carries enormous implications for the future. Ground robots. Ukraine has begun deploying unmanned ground vehicles armed with machine guns, lined for up to 45 days without stopping. They do not get tired. They do not get scared. They do not need food, water, or sleep. They do not experience the crushing psychological weight of sitting in a trench while drones circle overhead and artillery falls nearby. They just hold their position and engage any threat that approaches. Ukrainian military analysts believe that by the end of this year, the presence of these robots could reduce the number of human soldiers needed on the front line by as much as 30%. When you think about how much strain has been placed on Ukraine's population by years of war, that 30% reduction is not just a number. It is tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives that might be protected, tens of thousands of families that might not lose a father, a brother, a son. The numbers that Ukraine's commander-in-chief has shared paint a picture of a drone campaign that is still accelerating. In March of this year, drone sortie numbers increased by 55% compared to February. More than 11,000 combat drone missions were being executed every single day. In March alone, over 150,000 verified targets were struck. These are not estimates. Because every drone Ukraine flies carries a camera, every strike is recorded on video. The data is documented, confirmed, and analyzed. This is important not just for accountability, but because all of this recorded data is feeding Ukraine's artificial intelligence systems, making them smarter and more effective with every passing week. This brings up a point that is crucial for understanding why Russia cannot easily copy what Ukraine has done. The power of AI is not just in the algorithm, the software code that tells the machine how to think. The real power of AI is in the data that trains it. In Ukraine, he has spent more than 2.5 years collecting real battlefield data in real combat conditions against a real sophisticated enemy. Nearly 820,000 documented drone strikes in 2025 alone, every single one of them recorded on video. No other country in the world has a data set like this. No NATO exercise, no military simulation, no computer model can replicate what comes from actual combat experience at this scale. Ukraine's AI systems are being trained on the most realistic, most extensive, most detailed military drone data that has ever existed. And this is why Ukraine keeps pulling ahead. Russia faces what experts have described as a 3-layered trap when it comes to matching Ukraine's drone capabilities. The first layer is the chip problem. AI-powered drones require advanced microchips to function. The chips that run the recognition algorithms, process camera data in real time, and make targeting decisions are manufactured in the West and in Asia. Western sanctions have cut off Russia's access to these chips through normal trade channels. Russia can still obtain some chips through smuggling in third-party countries, but the quantities are limited and the prices are far higher. Ukraine, meanwhile, buys these same chips legally in large quantities at normal prices from Western suppliers. Before Russia can even build a drone, Ukraine is already ahead at the starting line. The second layer is the data gap. Even if Russia could get the chips, it lacks the data to train its AI systems to the same level of effectiveness. Russia is collecting some battlefield data, but it does not have the partnerships with Western intelligence agencies, the satellite coverage, or the analytical infrastructure that Ukraine and its allies have built together. Ukraine's data is being analyzed using NATO standard tools and shared with Western partners who contribute their own technological expertise. Russia is essentially trying to compete in a race where its opponent has a head start, better equipment, and a faster car. The third layer is time. Ukraine tests new drone technology on the battlefield every single day. When something works well, that lesson is captured and applied to the next batch of drones within weeks. When something fails, that failure is analyzed and corrected just as quickly. Russia, by contrast, must develop new systems in laboratories and test facilities because Ukrainian drones are constantly operating over the battlefield, making it difficult to safely test new Russian systems in the field. By the time Russia develops and tests a potential answer to what Ukraine is doing today, Ukraine will already be 2 or 3 generations ahead. This is a technology gap that is not closing, it is widening. Can Russia get help from its allies? China has drone technology, and Beijing has maintained friendly relations with Moscow throughout this war. But China has been careful not to provide Russia with full military technology transfers, fearing that doing so would trigger Western sanctions against Chinese companies and damage China's access to global markets. So far, China has stayed on the economic side of this relationship rather than the military. Technology side, North Korea has been sending soldiers and artillery shells, but sending more human soldiers is precisely the strategy that Ukraine's drones are destroying. More soldiers means more targets. Iran has provided Shahed drones, which Russia has used to strike Ukrainian cities, but Iran's drones are not AI-powered. They depend on GPS navigation and are vulnerable to the same electronic jamming that Ukraine's drones have been designed to overcome. They represent technology that is already 1 generation behind what Ukraine is deploying. And Iran is struggling to produce enough of them even for its own regional conflicts, let alone to supply Russia at the scale needed. Meanwhile, Ukraine's position is growing stronger in ways that go beyond the battlefield. President Zelensky has signed weapons cooperation agreements with Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. These countries are not just buying hardware from Ukraine. They are buying knowledge. They want to understand the doctrine Ukraine developed through years of real combat, how to build layered drone defense systems, how to use AI on the battlefield, how to counter incoming drone swarms at low cost. These are lessons worth billions to any country that faces drone threats. And in the Middle East, nearly every major country does. This relationship goes deeper than just money changing hands. Ukraine needs Patriot missile interceptors to defend against Russian hypersonic missiles like the Kh-47 Kinzhal and the Iskander ballistic missile. These Russian weapons are among the most difficult to intercept in the world. Gulf states have purchased large stockpiles of Patriot PSE-2 and PAC-3 interceptor missiles from the United States over the years. These missiles sit in storage, waiting for a threat. Ukraine has helped Gulf countries defend their oil infrastructure against Iranian drone Ad-A. Asimusi Kias using cheap Ukrainian drone interception systems, which means Gulf countries no longer need to fire expensive Patriot missiles to shoot down cheap Iranian Shaheds. The Patriot missiles that are freed up through this arrangement are then redirected to Ukraine through agreements and swap deals. It is a remarkable piece of diplomatic engineering. Ukraine is paying for its own advanced air defense by defending someone else's oil fields. The global economic angle is significant too. The attack on Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq oil processing facility in 2019 sent global oil prices surging because it demonstrated how vulnerable the Gulf's energy infrastructure was to drone attacks. That vulnerability created constant pressure on global markets. Now, with Ukraine providing drone defense technology to Gulf countries, that vulnerability is being reduced. Stable Gulf energy production means more stable global oil prices. It means less risk of supply disruptions that cause inflation around the world. Ukraine, a country that just 3 years ago was begging the world for weapons to survive, has become an invisible shield protecting the global energy supply chain. Looking at the Russian side, the psychological damage from this drone war is something that numbers cannot fully capture. There is a specific kind of fear that comes from knowing a machine is hunting you. A human soldier is dangerous, but a human soldier can be tired, can make mistakes, can be deceived. A drone does not get tired. It does not make emotional mistakes. It does not stop watching. Russian soldiers have reported a constant anxiety of looking up at the sky every few minutes, a freeze response every time they hear a buzzing sound, the inability to sleep deeply because their unconscious mind is always listening. Thermal camera drones can see through darkness. Night vision drones can operate when human eyes cannot. Trees provide no cover. Bunkers can be found because heat signatures leak through the earth. There's almost nowhere to hide, and Russian soldiers know it. Some of Ukraine's elite drone units have become names that Russian soldiers fear. Magoya's Birds, Phoenix, the 95th Air Assault Brigade. These names travel through the Russian military through whispered conversations, intercepted communications, and the terror of survivors. Legends create fear, and fear degrades fighting effectiveness. Soldiers who are psychologically broken make worse decisions, panic more easily, and are more likely to retreat or surrender. Ukraine is using drone warfare not just to destroy equipment, but to break the will of the people operating what equipment remains. So, where does this lead? The next frontier in this technology race is swarm warfare. Both sides are experimenting with groups of drones that can communicate with each other, share information, divide up tasks, and coordinate attacks without human operators guiding each individual machine. Imagine hundreds of drones launched at the same time, talking to each other in the air, collectively deciding which target each one should hit, coordinating their approaches to overwhelm defenses from multiple directions simultaneously. This is not science fiction. It is being tested right now, and with hundreds of thousands of drones operating every month, Ukraine has the perfect environment to develop and test this technology in real conditions. Ukraine is ahead in this race for the same reasons it is ahead everywhere else. More data, better technology access, and the ability to learn from real combat faster than any laboratory can replicate. The shift we are watching is not just tactical, it is historical. For most of human history, military power came from the number of soldiers a country could put on the field and the quality of the weapons those soldiers carried. Ukraine is demonstrating that this equation has fundamentally changed. A smaller country with fewer people can now fight effectively against a much larger country if it is willing to invest in smart, cheap, mass-produced autonomous systems. The country that can produce and deploy more intelligent machines faster than its enemy will have an enormous military advantage, regardless of how many human soldiers either side has. Russia is running a war on the logic of the 20th century. Mass mobilization, overwhelming numbers, human wave attacks. Ukraine is running a war on the logic of the 21st century. Autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, data-driven decisions, asymmetric cost exchange, and the results are becoming impossible to ignore. In 2022, Russian forces advanced, using armored vehicles and met fierce resistance. In 2024, they switched to motorcycles and small vehicles to avoid being spotted. In 2025, they moved in small infiltration groups, hoping that smaller targets would be harder to hit. In 2026, many of them cannot even reach the front line. They are being destroyed before they get there. The battlefield has moved in Ukraine's favor, not because Ukraine grew a bigger army, but because Ukraine built a smarter one. This is the story of a war that has already changed how the world thinks about military power. And it is a story that is not finished. The machines are getting smarter. The systems are getting cheaper to build and more expensive to defend against. And the country that was given almost no chance of survival 3 years ago is now teaching the world what modern warfare looks like. What comes next will shape not just this conflict, but how every country in the world thinks about defending itself for decades to come.